Look at your phone, not at the screen. At the phone itself. Inside that device, there is a rechargeable battery. Inside that battery, there is cobalt, and there is a very high chance, somewhere between 70 and 80%, that the cobalt in your phone was mined in one country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Inside your phone, there is also a component called a capacitor that regulates electrical charge. Inside that capacitor, there is a material called tantalum, refined from an ore called coltan, and there is a near certainty that the coltan was mined or passed through eastern Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo sits on what geologists estimate is $24 trillion of mineral wealth: cobalt, coltan, copper, lithium, gold, tin, tungsten, diamonds, rare earths. Nearly every critical mineral needed for the green energy transition and the digital economy exists in extraordinary abundance beneath one country's soil. That country has a per capita income of around $600 a year. More than 70% of its population lives on less than $2.15 a day. And right now, in 2025, over 7 million people are displaced inside its borders, the largest internal displacement crisis in Africa and one of the largest in the world. This is the story of the Congo, the richest poor country on earth, and the question of why those two things are not a contradiction, but a direct consequence. Economists have a term for what happens to countries that discover they are sitting on enormous natural wealth, the resource curse. The theory holds that resource-rich countries often develop worse, economically and politically, than resource-poor ones. The reasons are structural. Mineral wealth means you don't need to build a tax base, so you don't need to build institutions that serve citizens. It attracts foreign powers and corporations who find it easier to deal with a corruptible government than a functional one. It gives armed groups something to fight over that is easy to extract and sell. And it creates an economy that doesn't need most of its population to function, which means most of its population becomes disposable. The Congo is not just a case study of the resource curse, it is the definition of it, and the reason it has stayed cursed through colonialism, independence, dictatorship, civil war, and the modern tech economy is a story that begins not underground, but on a river. The Congo River is the second largest river in the world by volume of water discharged, after the Amazon. It is 4,700 kilometers long. Its basin covers 3.5 million square kilometers, an area larger than India. It crosses the equator twice. The river is the reason the Congo exists as a political unit. When European powers divided Africa at the Berlin Conference in 1884, they used rivers as the most obvious boundaries. The Congo River Basin became the territory of the Congo Free State, not because it was a coherent cultural or ethnic unit, but because it was a drainage basin that made geographical sense on a European map. The Congo rainforest, the second largest tropical rainforest on Earth after the Amazon, covers most of the basin. It is the lungs of Africa. It sequesters carbon at a rate that makes it one of the most important natural systems on the planet for regulating global climate. And underneath this rainforest, and in the highlands to the east, where the Congo's borders meet Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, is where the minerals are. Here is what makes the Democratic Republic of Congo almost uniquely difficult to govern. It is the size of Western Europe. It has a population of over 100 million people, the fourth most populous country in Africa, and it has approximately 5,000 kilometers of paved roads. For comparison, France, which is roughly 1/12 the size of the DRC, has over 1 million kilometers of road. The DRC has no meaningful railway network connecting its eastern and western regions. The Congo River is the main internal transport artery, but it flows west, not north-south, and large sections are unnavigable for much of the year. The eastern provinces, North Kivu, South Kivu, Ituri, Maniema, are separated from the capital Kinshasa by a rainforest the size of France and a road network that barely exists. A central government cannot project meaningful power into these areas. It cannot move troops quickly. It cannot collect taxes. It cannot deliver services. This physical ungovernability is not a political failure. It is a geographical fact, and it is precisely why, for 150 years, the Eastern Congo has been governed not by its capital, but by whoever held the mines. The Eastern DRC shares borders with 9 countries, more than any other nation in Africa except Sudan. To the east, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania. To the north, South Sudan, Central African Republic. To the west, Republic of Congo, Angola. To the south, Zambia. Every single one of these countries has, at some point in the last 30 years, either sent military forces into the DRC, backed a militia operating inside it, or profited from smuggling its minerals across the border. This is not coincidence, it is geography. Eastern Congo's mineral wealth is accessible from the east, through the highlands, along routes into Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi. The minerals can be extracted from the ground in eastern Congo and driven to Kigali or Kampala in hours. They cannot be driven to Kinshasa without weeks of travel on non-existent roads. The result, Eastern Congo's economy faces east, its politics faces east, its wars are fought by eastern neighbors, and its minerals leave eastward, often mislabeled, often untaxed, often funding the same militias fighting over the mines that produced them. In 1884, the European powers gathered in Berlin to divide Africa between them. The Berlin Conference, which we covered in another episode, allocated territories. When it came to the Congo Basin, the territory was given not to Belgium, but to one man, Leopold II, King of Belgium, as his personal private property. Leopold did not own Belgium's Congo, he owned the Congo, personally, as if it were a piece of real estate he had purchased. He called it the Congo Free State, a name that contained a precise inversion of its reality. It was a state in which almost nothing was free, least of all the people. The Congo Basin was rich in ivory and rubber. In the 1890s, the global rubber boom created enormous demand, bicycle tires, then automobile tires. The industrial world needed rubber, and the Congo's rainforest had it in abundance. Leopold's method of extraction was simple: forced labor enforced by terror. Every village was assigned a rubber quota. Failure to meet the quota was punished by the force publique, Leopold's private army, who took hostages, burned villages, and, in what became the most notorious symbol of Leopold's regime, cut off the hands of those who didn't produce enough rubber. The severed hand became the currency of compliance. Force publique soldiers were required to provide a human hand for every bullet spent, to prove they hadn't wasted ammunition. The hands were collected in baskets, photographed, documented, by missionaries who were horrified, by journalists who eventually made the world pay attention. Historians estimate that between 10 and 15 million Congolese died under Leopold's rule, from forced labor, starvation, disease, and direct violence. The population of the Congo Basin is estimated to have halved between 1880 and 1920. This was one of the largest colonial atrocities in history, and it has been almost entirely forgotten by the Western world. It was exposed briefly. In the early 1900s, a British shipping clerk named Edmund Morrell noticed that ships returning from the Congo carried rubber and ivory, but carried no trade goods into the Congo. The only thing being taken out was profit. He realized what this meant. No trade was occurring. People were being forced to produce, at gunpoint, for nothing. Morrell started a human rights movement. Roger Casement, a British diplomat, traveled to the Congo and documented the atrocities in graphic detail. Mark Twain wrote a satirical pamphlet, The Archbishop of Canterbury Spoke Out. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a book. The first great international human rights campaign of the 20th century was about the Congo. In 1908, under international pressure, Leopold was forced to cede his personal property to the Belgian government. He received compensation. He received annual payments described, officially, as a mark of gratitude for his great sacrifices for the Congo. Before handing it over, Leopold burned the Congo's administrative archives. He said, "I will give them my Congo, but they have no right to know what I did there." The Belgian colonial period continued for 50 more years. The atrocities stopped. The extraction did not. Under Belgian colonial rule from 1908 to 1960, the Congo became somewhat more administered and somewhat less murderous. But the fundamental logic remained unchanged. Extract as much as possible, invest as little as possible in Congolese education, infrastructure, or political participation. By 1960, when the Congo was preparing for independence, there were fewer than 30 university graduates in a country of 14 million people. Belgians had refused to educate Congolese above the primary level for 5 decades, fearing that educated Congolese would demand political rights. The Congo's mineral wealth, copper from Katanga, uranium from Shinkolobwe, the same uranium that went into the atomic bombs dropped on Japan, gold, tin, had made Belgium wealthy for half a century. The Congo itself had almost no professionals, no civil servants trained for governance, no military officers above the rank of sergeant. It was, in one of the most accurate phrases ever applied to a colonial handover, a country handed independence and handed nothing else. On June 30th, 1960, the Democratic Republic of Congo achieved independence from Belgium. The official ceremony in Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, featured Belgian King Baudouin giving a speech praising Leopold II, the man who had killed 10 million Congolese, as a great humanist pioneer. Then Patrice Lumumba, Congo's newly elected first prime minister, stood up and gave a speech that was not on the program, a speech nobody had asked him to give, a speech that changed the temperature of the room and within months ended his life. He said, "We are no longer your monkeys." He described, in vivid and unflinching terms, what Belgian colonialism had actually done to the Congolese people. He was not diplomatic, he was not conciliatory, he was right. Lumumba wanted Congo's mineral wealth to stay in Congo. He wanted to nationalize the copper mines of Katanga. He wanted to build a country rather than an extraction site. He reached out to the Soviet Union for technical assistance when the West refused to help. That last step sealed his fate. Within weeks of independence, chaos engulfed the Congo. The mineral-rich province of Katanga, backed by Belgian mining interests and Belgian troops, declared secession. Lumumba asked the United Nations for help. The United Nations sent peacekeepers but refused to deploy them to Katanga. He asked the United States. The United States refused and began working to remove him. In September 1960, Colonel Joseph Mobutu, a young army officer, led a military coup that removed Lumumba from power. The CIA had identified Lumumba as a Soviet sympathizer and actively worked to facilitate his removal. Senate investigations decades later would confirm United States involvement. On January 17, 1961, just 6 months after independence, Patrice Lumumba was taken to Katanga by plane. Soldiers beat and tortured him on the flight. He was executed by firing squad. A Belgian officer dissolved Lumumba's body in sulfuric acid. One tooth was kept as a trophy. Belgium admitted moral responsibility for Lumumba's killing decades later. In 2022, 61 years after his death, Belgium returned that tooth to his family. His daughter buried it in Kinshasa, the only part of him that could be found. The man who tried to keep Congo's wealth for the Congo was replaced by the man who would steal it most efficiently. Mobutu Sese Seko ruled the country he renamed Zaire for 32 years, from 1965 to 1997. He ruled with United States and Western support throughout the Cold War because he was reliably anti-Soviet and reliably willing to allow Western mining companies to operate. In return, Mobutu looted his country on a scale that remains almost incomprehensible. His personal fortune at his peak was estimated at between $4 and $15 billion, roughly equivalent to Zaire's entire external debt. He built a palace in his ancestral village in the jungle. He flew Concorde to Europe for shopping trips. He built a marble-floored airport in the middle of nowhere to receive foreign dignitaries visiting his jungle palace. Meanwhile, the infrastructure Belgium had built, roads, railways, the river transport system, decayed. Schools closed. Hospitals ran out of supplies. The formal economy collapsed. By the 1990s, Zaire had some of the most extreme poverty in the world, despite sitting on one of the most valuable mineral endowments in history. When the Cold War ended and Mobutu was no longer useful to the West, he was quietly abandoned. He died of cancer in exile in Morocco in 1997. The same year, a rebel coalition led by Laurent-Désiré Kabila finally overthrew him. But the chaos Mobutu left behind, the hollowed-out state, the fractured East, the culture of impunity, became the petri dish for what came next. In 1994, the Rwandan genocide killed approximately 800,000 Tutsi and moderate Hutu in 100 days. It is one of the fastest mass killings in human history. When the genocide ended, when Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front forces took control of Rwanda, more than 1 million Hutu fled into eastern Zaire. Among them, the genocidaires, the Hutu militias who had carried out the killings, now armed and reorganized in refugee camps just across the border from Rwanda, in the jungle around Goma and Bukavu. Rwanda's new government considered these camps an existential threat, and Mobutu's Zaire, already collapsing, was either unable or unwilling to disarm the genocidaire. In 1996, Rwanda and Uganda invaded eastern Zaire, backing a rebel coalition led by Laurent-Désiré Kabila. The First Congo War toppled Mobutu in 8 months. Kabila renamed the country the Democratic Republic of Congo. Within 2 years, Kabila had turned against his Rwandan and Ugandan backers. In 1998, Rwanda and Uganda invaded again. This time Angola, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Chad and Sudan intervened on Kabila's side. 9 African nations were at war on Congolese soil. The Second Congo War, sometimes called Africa's World War, lasted from 1998 to 2003. 6 million people are estimated to have died, not mainly from bullets, but from disease and starvation caused by displacement, the collapse of healthcare, and the breakdown of food production. It is the deadliest conflict since World War II. It happened mostly without the world paying attention. The Second Congo War is often explained as ethnic conflict or as a spillover from the Rwandan genocide. Both are true. But there is a third explanation that nobody advertising smartphones wants to discuss. The areas of eastern Congo with the heaviest fighting were the areas with the most valuable mines. In 1999, as the war intensified, a new technology was transforming global communications, the mobile phone. Mobile phones require capacitors. Capacitors require tantalum. Tantalum is refined from coltan, and the world's largest known coltan deposits sit in the eastern DRC, in North Kivu, directly in the middle of the war zone. As global demand for mobile phones spiked in the late 1990s, the price of coltan rose from less than $10 per kilogram to over $400 per kilogram between 1999 and 2001. The eastern Congo, which produced roughly 60% of the world's coltan supply, became the most valuable piece of territory in Africa. A United Nations panel of experts investigated in 2002 and concluded that the continuation of the conflict was linked to the exploitation of natural resources and that troops from Rwanda and Uganda, officially fighting for security reasons, were systematically looting mines, timber, and other resources from the territories they occupied. The war was, in part, a mining competition fought with guns over minerals that ended up in mobile phones sold in Europe, North America, and Asia. The Second Congo War officially ended in 2003 with a peace agreement and a transitional government, but in eastern Congo, the fighting never stopped. Over 100 armed groups have operated in eastern DRC at various points since 2003. Some are ethnic militias defending their communities. Some are criminal enterprises mining and taxing mineral flows. Some are proxies for neighboring governments, Rwanda and Uganda particularly, that find it more profitable to fund armed groups than to stop them. The DRC's national army, the FARD, has been chronically underpaid, poorly trained, and itself implicated in atrocities against civilians. United Nations peacekeepers, MONUSCO, have been present since 1999, at various points the largest and most expensive United Nations mission in the world, with limited success. The pattern is consistent: a peace deal, a ceasefire, a period of relative calm, then a new armed group emerges, or an old one rearmed by a neighbor, Another wave of displacement, another humanitarian crisis reported briefly by international media, then forgotten again, until 2025, when the pattern broke in a new and alarming way. The DRC produces between 70 and 80% of the world's cobalt. This is not a minor export. Cobalt is the material that makes lithium-ion batteries, the batteries in your phone, your laptop, your electric vehicle, stable and energy-dense. Without cobalt, the EV revolution does not happen on its current timeline. The cobalt mines of southern DRC, primarily in Lualaba and Haut-Katanga provinces, are a mix of large industrial operations, mostly owned by Chinese companies, and artisanal mines. The artisanal mines are where the human rights issues are most acute. In artisanal mining, small-scale, informal, using hand tools, an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 people work in cobalt mines in southern DRC. A significant percentage of them are children. Human rights investigations have documented children as young as 7 working underground in cobalt tunnels, earning the equivalent of $1 or $2 per day, exposed to toxic dust that causes lung disease and at risk from tunnel collapses. The cobalt from artisanal mines mixes with industrially mined cobalt at processing points. It is then exported to China, where over 80% of the world's cobalt is refined. From China, it goes into batteries. From batteries, into phones, laptops and electric vehicles sold by Apple, Samsung, Tesla, GM, and every other major technology and automotive company. In December 2024, the DRC government sued subsidiaries of Apple in Belgium and France, accusing the company of sourcing conflict minerals and benefiting from child labor in its supply chain. Apple denies systematic sourcing of conflict minerals. In the eastern Congo, the mineral story is about coltan, and about one of the most sophisticated mineral laundering operations in the world. Coltan, the ore that contains tantalum, is mined in North Kivu, in the highlands near Goma and Rubaya. It is controlled in many areas by armed militias. The M23 rebel group, which we will come to in a moment, controls the Rubaya mine, one of the largest coltan deposits in the world, and imposes taxes on everything extracted. Independent estimates suggest M23 generates between $300,000 and $800,000 per month from Rubaya alone. The coltan is then transported to Rwanda. Rwanda is not a major coltan producer. Rwanda has negligible domestic coltan reserves. But in 2023, Rwanda exported 150 metric tons of coltan. In 2024, Rwanda's coltan exports exceeded its domestic production by orders of magnitude. In Rwanda, the coltan is relabeled. It enters the legitimate global supply chain as Rwandan coltan. It is certified, with paperwork. It is sold to manufacturers. It ends up in capacitors in devices sold to consumers who have no idea. The United States Treasury Department noted in 2022 that over 90% of DRC's gold was being smuggled to Rwanda and Uganda, refined and exported to international markets, particularly the UAE, as domestic production. The same mechanism applies to coltan. The EU, in 2024, signed a minerals cooperation agreement with Rwanda, a deal that critics described as effectively providing diplomatic cover for the laundering of Congolese conflict minerals. The dominant foreign power in the Congo's mining sector today is not Belgium, not the United States, not France. It is China. Chinese companies control the majority of the large cobalt and copper mining operations in southern DRC. China refines over 80% of the world's cobalt. China's Huiyu Cobalt, through its subsidiary Congo Dongfang Mining International, is one of the largest cobalt traders from the DRC. In 2024, Chinese infrastructure investment commitments in the DRC were valued at $7 billion. China's approach is explicitly transactional, mines and infrastructure in exchange for minerals. It does not attach human rights conditions. It does not demand governance reforms. It works with whatever government is in power. This makes it enormously attractive to DRC's government and enormously efficient. The result is that China now controls the critical bottleneck in the supply chain for the green energy transition, The cobalt for every EV battery in Europe and the United States flows through Chinese refineries. Every Western government talking about clean energy and supply chain diversification is in practice dependent on China's control of a mineral that comes from the Congo. The second Trump administration recognized this. Its stated objective in 2025 was to stabilize Congo and create conditions for United States investment in mining. This is why the United States, for the first time in decades, engaged directly in mediating the DRC-Rwanda conflict. On January 27, 2025, M23 rebels entered Goma, the largest city in eastern Congo, with a population of over 1 million people, on the shores of Lake Kivu. The fall of Goma was not a surprise. M23 had been advancing since 2022, when the group re-emerged after a decade of dormancy with renewed Rwandan military support. By late 2024, the rebels controlled most of North Kivu province, including the strategically critical Rubaya Coltan mines. But Goma itself was different. Goma is the humanitarian hub of eastern Congo, the base for United Nations agencies, international NGOs, medical organizations. It is the city where the world's humanitarian response to Congo's crisis is coordinated. Its fall on January 27th sent shockwaves through the international community in a way that years of rural fighting had not. In the 2 weeks around the fall of Goma, over 3,000 people were killed. Another 2,800 were wounded. An estimated 2,400 Congolese army soldiers surrendered en masse at the Stade de l'Unité Stadium on January 30th. The DRC government accused Rwanda of directing the offensive. Rwanda denied having troops in Congo. Satellite imagery and United Nations investigators documented Rwandan military equipment and personnel operating alongside M23. The fall of Goma triggered the most direct American engagement in Congolese affairs since the Cold War. The Trump administration, motivated explicitly by the desire to secure American access to Congolese minerals and compete with China's supply chain dominance, stepped in as mediator. Talks were held in Qatar, then in Washington. On June 27, 2025, the DRC and Rwanda signed what became known as the Washington Accord, a United States-mediated provisional peace agreement that included provisions for Rwandan troop withdrawal from eastern Congo within 90 days, disarmament of non-state armed groups, and the return of refugees. The DRC also extended a cobalt export ban it had imposed in February 2025, initially intended to stabilize market prices after cobalt hit record lows, suggesting Kinshasa was using its mineral leverage as part of the diplomatic picture. The Washington Accord was described by United States officials as a breakthrough. It was also the latest in a long series of peace agreements for eastern Congo, each of which had previously produced a period of hope, followed by collapse. The M23 group itself was the product of a failed 2013 peace agreement. The very instability being negotiated in 2025 was caused, in part, by the failure of the agreement that created M23's predecessor. As of mid-2026, M23 has not fully withdrawn from eastern Congo. The Accord's implementation remains incomplete. Here is the pattern that has defined the Congo for 150 years. A valuable resource is identified. A foreign power or corporation determines that the most efficient way to extract it is to work with a local authority that exercises control through force rather than legitimacy. That authority, whether it is Leopold's force publique, Belgian mining concessions, Mobutu's kleptocracy, Rwanda-backed militias, or Chinese mining companies, profits from the extraction. The Congolese people living near the resource experience violence, displacement, and poverty. The resource leaves. The profit does not stay. The international community responds with concern, investigations, and eventually inaction. The mineral changes: rubber, ivory, uranium, copper, cobalt, coltan. The mechanism doesn't. What has changed in 2025 is the scale of international interest, driven entirely by the fact that the minerals needed for the green energy transition are the same minerals that have been funding violence in eastern Congo for 30 years. The electric vehicle that is supposed to solve climate change is powered by a battery whose cobalt was almost certainly mined in conditions that would be illegal anywhere a law is enforced. This is not a reason to oppose electric vehicles. It is a reason to demand traceable, accountable, conflict-free supply chains, and to accept that those supply chains will be more expensive and that the cost difference will have to be paid by someone. The Democratic Republic of Congo has $24 trillion of mineral wealth beneath its soil. It has 7 million displaced people. It has a child in a cobalt mine earning $2 a day so that a battery can be manufactured in China and inserted into a device sold in Europe or North America for $1,000. It has a first prime minister whose tooth was returned to his family 61 years after he was killed for trying to keep his country's wealth for his country's people. It has a peace deal signed in Washington by a United States administration whose primary stated motivation was securing American access to the minerals that fund the violence the deal is supposed to stop. The Congo is not a distant problem. It is not an African problem. It is inside the device you are watching this video on, or the car you drove here, or the battery that will power the energy transition being promised by every government in the world. The resource curse is real, but it requires a buyer. The curse runs through a supply chain, and that supply chain ends with you. Knowing that doesn't solve anything, but not knowing it means you are making choices you haven't been given the information to make. I'm InMaps, and this is the world, one line at a time.